our role as pets in our society, an issue that's near and dear to many birders' hearts. Many of us are also cat owners, looking to eat some yet. And so, yeah, I anticipate a great talk that I'm hoping will be informative to us all. So without further ado, I think Zane had something to say about field trips, but he's not here right now. So just look online for our field trips. We have some spaces open on, I think, a couple upcoming ones. Bridgeway Island, that Lynette and I are leaving, right? February. Anyway, so yeah, without further ado, take it away, Hee Jin.
All right. Okay, thank you everyone for coming. And can the Zoom folks hear me okay? I think if someone could give me a thumbs up or leave something.
Yes, I can hear you fine right now. Yes.
Make sure
And there's a thumbs
everything
up.
is good. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you for YOLO Bird Alliance for hosting me and inviting me to give this talk. So today my talk will be on cats as pets, predators, and prey, the relationship between people and cats and its implications for wildlife. So before we get started, I wanted to say a little bit about myself. So I'm a sixth year PhD candidate here at UC Davis in the Animal Behavior Graduate Group. I'm involved with 3 different labs here. Oh, I think there's people joining the waiting room and popping up. Okay. I'm in 3 different labs here in Dr. Andy C's lab, looking at the effects of rapid environmental change on animal behavior, in Dr. Carly Moody's lab in animal welfare epidemiology, and Dr. Ben Sachs's lab in mammalian ecology and conservation. So I'm kind of at this interface between human-induced environmental changes and animal welfare and conservation. This isn't just a random shape, it's a map of Pennsylvania, which is where I'm from. I am from just out of Philadelphia, about an hour out, Lansdale, if anybody is familiar with that area. And in Philly, I received my bachelor's in biology at Temple University in 2020. And there, I was really interested in ecology and environmental science. So I got to dip my toes first into the world of research by being involved with lizard phylogenetics work, and then moving on to some work with the effect of climate change on deep sea corals and their physiology. But besides my research, something that really piqued my interest when I was at Temple was just urban ecology as a concept and just ecology in general, which is just referring to this idea that the environment can either foster or hinder various interactions that happen between animals and therefore their well-being and their fitness. So all of that really piqued my interest into the world of ecology for the first time. I had never really considered myself to be a naturalist before that. But something in particular that I was really interested in was looking at these animals that were thriving in these urban environments, like the eastern gray squirrel and the house sparrow, and looking at why it is that certain animals are doing really well in these really altered habitats. And of course, the role that people play in the midst of all of this, kind of mitigating or regulating these relationships and interactions between animals. So that's what brought me to UC Davis to join the Animal Behavior Graduate Group. But when I first got here, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to study or what system I wanted to investigate. But something that became really clear to me and fascinated me right from the beginning when I first moved to Davis was just the amount of outdoor cats in Davis, which on a normal, I go on regular walks daily, and on a normal evening walk for about an hour, I would see an average of 15 to 20 cats outside, which really shocked me. And something that was even more shocking about that was that most of these were owned cats and not, stray or feral cats. So many of them would come up to me to ask for pets or when I approached them, they wouldn't run away. They were clearly really, hold on, I don't know. Yeah, they were clearly really familiar with people and owned by people. Sometimes they'd just be hanging out in front of their porch. And this was especially a shock to me because where I'm from in Philadelphia, if you saw a cat outside, that cat was not owned. That never happened in Philadelphia. Most cats that were outside were stray cats or colony cats that were neutered and being taken care of by local volunteers, or a cat that just left the house by accident and was lost. So that really baffled me and led me to this question of why it is that even within the same country, there were certain regions where people have this very different culture and understanding of how cats should be managed compared to other areas. So that kind of kick-started the rest of my dissertation. So today I'll be talking to you about four main things about cats and wildlife. So first I'll start out with a brief introduction of the topic of cats and wildlife. And then I will go into more about how people have been studying the effect of cats on wildlife, which I think is something that not a lot of people get a chance to take a look at. And then I'll go into looking at how I found it really important to incorporate people into my research. And lastly, ending with some future directions and need for future research. So first, to give you a brief summary of cats and wildlife. Domestic cats, as you know, are one of the most popular common companion animals. How many of you are cat owners here? Okay, many of you. So almost half of you. Yeah, I'm a cat owner myself. I have two cats at home. Um, and actually, cats are not only one of the most popular companion animals, but also one of the fastest growing population of companion animals. So in other words, compared to dogs or other companion pets, cats are gaining popularity in our society. And something that's really interesting is that they are often labeled as semi-domesticated. So dogs we often think of as completely domesticated. We've been artificially breeding them for decades. Cats, on the other hand, we think of as domesticated because they're reliant on us for food and shelter, or many of them can be food, water, and shelter. But at the same time, they still exhibit some behaviors that we wouldn't expect to see in a domesticated animal, such as hunting wild animals. And there's in the corner a photo of one of my cats, Memi, who is hunting a worm who he's unfortunately not allowed to go outside, so he only exhibits hunting behavior towards toys. But nevertheless, if you've ever seen a cat play with a toy, you can see some similarities between their behavior towards a toy and their behavior towards what would be presumed a wild animal. So they still retain a lot of these behaviors, which is really interesting, despite the fact that they've been living with us for decades. And this is a behavior that isn't actually uncommon in other animals, like for dogs, for example. If you've ever walked a dog and there's a dog that sees a squirrel running away or running up a tree, you can imagine the dog wants to chase it. That also happens. But something that's unique to cats is that they exhibit a lot of surplus hunting. So even when they're not hungry, they will exhibit a lot of hunting behavior. And there's a lot of debate about why that happens. Some people think it's because they're practicing hunting in case in the future they will need to hunt for food. And other people think that it is for enjoyment or play. So it's a form of enrichment to entertain themselves. So, but no one really knows exactly why they do it. We just know that they do a lot of it. And it causes a lot of damage to the environment. So in 2016, Doherty et al. Wrote this paper showing that cats are implicated in approximately 26% of world's bird, mammal, and reptile extinctions. And Loss et al., which I think is a paper that was featured in a newsletter at Yola Bird Alliance in the past, but they showed that they predicted that cats cause billions of bird deaths and billions of mammal deaths annually. So this is a problem that we know for sure, and people have been trying to control cat populations as a result. And there's many methods of controlling their populations, and something that is very common and popular and commonly used is a method called trap, neuter, release. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but it's this humane trap, meaning that it doesn't cause any damage to the animal that's inside. They set this contraption up and with some food bait over there, and when the animal walks on top of this plate and touches it, the trap will close, and therefore the animal can't escape. And then they would be taken to a local shelter or veterinary clinic, and that's when they will get neutered or spayed, and they're typically released back into the wild in the exact location that they were found. So that's generally the protocol, and this is often used all around the world. But some downsides of using this method is that you often trap other animals that you don't intend to trap, such as possums here. They're a very common animal to find in cat traps, or raccoons. People have found raccoons a lot. And cats in general are also really difficult to trap. Only a certain number of cats are willing to even walk into a trap like this because they're very cautious of this new contraptions, this new weird looking object. It smells weird. And so that can be a challenge with this kind of method. And another challenge is that even after cats are neutered or spayed, they still continue to show hunting behavior. So if you have cats that are neutered or spayed, they will still exhibit some form of hunting behavior. And in fact, neutering has not been shown to reduce hunting behavior, just reduces the overall population density by preventing them from being able to reproduce. So even though overall it can decrease the amount of cats in the area, in terms of stopping each individual from hunting, it's not super effective. And of course, only, like I said, only a certain number of cats are willing to walk into a trap like this. And people have actually suggested that there are behavioral differences between cats that are willing to walk into a trap versus cats that want to stay away. So, some people in the past have suggested that we're actually creating a selection event where the cats that are more likely to approach this new object, probably also more likely to approach new people and maybe more friendly, are more likely to go and get neutered, and now they can't reproduce. Whereas all these feral cats that are much more afraid of people and these new objects are now allowed to reproduce, and therefore creating this behavioral shift in the population. And that hasn't been explicitly shown or tested, but it has been suggested as being a potential challenge to a method like this. And in addition to trap, neuter, and release, there's also the method of culling. So a lot of, even though this is not done in the United States, there's a lot of countries that will directly just kill cats in the environment. And this is a New York Times article if you're interested in reading more about this, about Australia that's been dedicated to culling millions of cats in the environment. And it makes sense for them, and New Zealand, where there's a lot of vulnerable species that are being depredated because of cats and other non-native predators that have been brought onto the island. So there's more about that in that article. And in addition to this, there's generally been a lot of research on culling in general. It's very interesting. There's a whole set of literature on how to trap a cat easily and to increase their trapability, and also these quote unquote more clever ways to poison cats, because cats are very cautious and they're very sensitive to changes in their environment. So often if you mix poison into their food, they will know because they can smell that there's something weird in their food. So they will often not eat it, and it's not an effective measure of poisoning them. So people actually, specifically this researcher, Catherine Mosby in Australia, has invented this contraption where a cat will walk to this can of tuna that is just normal tuna, and they'll start eating it. And as soon as they start eating it, they'll spray poison onto their skin so that they will groom themselves. And then through grooming themselves, they'll ingest poison, and that's how they will die. And obviously, this has a lot of issues in itself too. First of all, the sheer number of cats that are in the environment makes it really hard to have people cull cats and that be the effective measure of population control. And of course, there's welfare concerns about that. And as a cat owner and lover myself, I don't love the idea of just shooting down cats because I love them. But so there's a lot of strong opposition that comes from people who believe that all these cats deserve a chance to potentially be adopted. And on that note, adoption has been suggested as another potential method of controlling the population outside, and definitely less morbid way of controlling the population. But of course, adopting a cat that is already outside relies on the fact that you can find them and bring them inside. So that sometimes relies on traps. So you run into the same problems that you were running into with TNR, where only certain cats are willing to go in, not all of them. And then meanwhile, a kitten can have a litter starting at 6 months old. So you can have just hundreds of cats being born while you are trying to trap one cat. So that is a challenge. And also, not all cats that are outside can be, I guess, not domesticated, but can live in harmony with people indoors. A lot of them are still exhibit feral behavior, so they don't want to be touched or want to be around people. So there's only a certain number of cats that will exhibit friendly behaviors enough to be adopted. And of course, there's also the superstition of black cats and how people think that black cats bring bad luck, and they also often spend longer in shelters, or older cats that people don't really want to adopt because of potential health issues. Those all can be issues that you can run into when you're trying to use this as a strategy. And also with adoption, often shelters all around the country and all around the world, animal shelters are always understaffed, always overcrowded, especially around kitten season, which actually with climate change, kitten season has gotten longer and longer to the point where it doesn't exist anymore, where depending on where you are, of course, all throughout the year, cats are having kittens. But especially during kitten season, they will, on average, like for example, the Yolo County Animal Shelter in the summer often gets 20 cats in or 20 kittens in a given day, whereas they're only adopting out 3 or 4 cats or able to adopt out 3 or 4 cats a day. So it can be really a burden on the shelter staff and the overall system. Another method that people have been trying to use more lately has been focusing on educating owners and educating people about the effect of cats on wildlife and how providing outdoor access can actually allow cats to hunt more. So I'll be talking to you more about that a little bit later. But before we get there, I want to kind of give you an overview of how people have studied the effect of cats on wildlife. So the most, I think, easy to understand example is camera traps. You just leave a camera out there and see what you find. And a lot of people, so this is a camera trap if you're not familiar. It's camouflaged into the environment and is motion detected. So every time there is motion detected, it will either take a snapshot of what it saw or take a short video of the animal that was detected. And most people who have actually studied the effect of cats on wildlife using this did not start out with the intent of studying cats. In fact, Daniel Herrera, who recently published this paper in Biological Conservation about this, he intended to study coyotes and other wildlife in this urban environment in Washington, D.C., but he just had hundreds and hundreds of cats on camera that he just had to pivot and say, now this is what I'm studying. So he went through all these photos and videos of cats with different prey in their mouths. And eventually, by analyzing the data, he found that forest edges in particular were most vulnerable to cat predation of native wildlife compared to other areas. And interestingly, that cat predation was most abundant in areas that were areas with supplemental food. So in areas where people provided feeding stations and things like that were also the areas they were seeing more predation done by cats, which I thought was really interesting. And the paper in the end recommended that we implement exclusionary buffer zones to protect these vulnerable locations like forest edges, and also to control specific locations for these feeding stations and supplemental food. So I thought that was a really neat use of camera traps. And of course, you can also put the camera on the cat itself, which has been done before by some people. And here's a video of what that looks like when a cat is wearing a camera. This is actually a very, a very popular Instagram influencer who makes his living out of filming his cats by having a little camera on their collar. And they are up to all sorts of stuff. Like they are on roofs, they're on people's trash cans, they meet other cats, they eat things, they lick puddles, they catch birds and rodents and all kinds of stuff. So it's really fascinating to see kind of get the secret look into their life when they go outside. And I don't know if any of you have outdoor cats, but if you do, many people who have outdoor cats are often curious about what they do when they are outside. So this kind of content has gained a lot of views recently. And it's really amazing what kinds of things that they're able to do. So yeah. And the big pro associated with these cat-borne cameras is that when you do capture footage, it is really accurate. You can literally see what they're doing. You can see what they're holding in their mouths. You can see where they're going. You can tell that they've stopped. You can tell they're running, all that kind of stuff. So it's perhaps the most precise form of collecting data of their behavior. But also, if you've ever worked with cameras and having to be on battery, cameras having to be on battery, like wireless cameras, it's always a challenge to find a good balance between battery life and their weight. And so with these kinds of little cameras, unfortunately, most commercially available cameras that are light enough and small enough to go on a cat's collar can capture about 15 minutes of footage per day on a battery charge, which is not quite enough to use for research purposes because who knows what they're doing for the remaining 5 hours if you're only able to capture 15 minutes. So that has been a challenge I've run into when I was trying to use this as a method. And of course, they're really costly. So each of those little cameras costs about $350 to $400. So, and of course, they can lose them when they're outside. So that's also a barrier to using this as a method. And identifying the prey that are in their mouths can sometimes be really difficult. You can maybe say this is a rodent of some kind, but you might not be able to tell if it's a native or non-native rodent. So that has been also a challenge. And only certain cats tolerate these cameras on their collars. So some cats, I don't know if you have cats that really hate collars. I have one cat that would just not keep a collar on. And if your cat is in that boat, your cat would not be a good candidate for a study with these kinds of cameras. And that of course selects for a certain kind of cat. And so some researchers have actually collaborated with Nat Geo to make these things called kitty cams that are bulkier, but they have longer battery life, and um, they can actually record about 10 hours of footage per day instead of 15 minutes. But unfortunately, it's not a commercially available camera or anything. But they have been able to use contraptions like this to study cats. And here is just, I know that the screen looks a little too bright, but they had 26 cats in total that they camera collared. And these were all colony cats. So they were not owned cats. They lived outside 100% of the time. And only about 18 cats out of those 26 cats killed anything that they caught. I believe 21 cats out of 26 cats showed any kind of hunting behavior. But among those 21, 18 killed prey. And even among those 18 that killed, you can see birds are a solid block over there. So female 2 here, and then male 1 were the only two cats that actually killed birds, which I think really surprised these researchers. So this was in Georgia, and I believe this was done in 2 different seasons. But something that's really interesting to me also is that this one male cat just hunted a bunch during that study period, whereas there were other cats that did not hunt many, if at all. They only hunted one, most of these cats up here. So my big takeaway and their big takeaway also from this study was that individuals matter. So when you're looking at a population of cats of, let's say, 20, 30 cats, not all of them might hunt and not all of them might hunt birds, but there are some individuals that will hunt birds and they will hunt a lot of it. So that's why I think the focus on individuals is something that we need to do more of. And another method of assessing the effect of cats on wildlife is by looking at their consumption of wild prey. So there's many methods of doing that. Stable isotope analysis is one where you look at the ratio of carbon and nitrogen to see what the origin of the things that are in the cat's whiskers, for example, are. And you can tell if it's an animal or a plant, or if it is an animal, what trophic level the animal is in, but not super high resolution. But a method like DNA metabarcoding, which is a method that I've used for my research, entails collecting cat scats. And then essentially, like you can imagine a barcode, you're scanning for DNA of different animals in the scat. So you're able to get to sometimes even the species level of the animal DNA that you found in the scat, which can lead to a lot of high resolution data in some cases. But of course, it's very costly. It costs about $100 per sample to process fully. And not all cats that hunt will consume prey. And actually, not all cats that hunt will actually kill their prey. Sometimes they will just kind of harass the prey and then let it go. So that can be a challenge. And then also it can be difficult to locate cat scats. Maybe some of you will disagree if you have a lot of cat scats in your gardens, which I know is a problem for people, but yeah, it can be difficult to actually locate cat scats. And this was a study done by Laura Plimpton at Columbia in New York City, where they collected a bunch of scats deposited by feral cats. And they looked at what are the different, using DNA metabarcoding, what are the different kinds of animals they're finding. And I made this box here around birds. And in particular, so there were 2 non-native species of birds found in this study, the feral pigeon and the European starling. And besides those non-native species, I've highlighted the native species here. So the numbers that you're seeing are frequency of occurrence or percentage of scats that contained that particular species. And actually, when you do the math, the 4.8, 6.7, all these smaller numbers are only one scat in that colony. So the 5 different A, B, C, D, E refer to 5 different colonies they used. So within each population, there was only one, for example, only one scat that contained the yellow-bellied sapsucker, and only one scat in colony B that contained that species, and then another scat that contained the American robin and some unknown warbler, etc. So the only exception to that was the song sparrow, which was found in 5 different cats in that particular colony. But the takeaway here is similar to the previous study in that individuals matter. So of those 21 cats, not all of them showed bird DNA in their scat, but one did. And same thing with all of these other populations of feral cats, where these particular individuals are the ones that we need to look out for. Uh-oh, you can't see this photo. That was a photo of a cat with a mouse on the ground. And this is another method of actually collecting data on cat predation, which is to ask owners. So if you're familiar with the idea of cats kind of hunting something, bringing back like a gift for the owner and leaving it on the front door, many people have experienced this. Actually, this happened to us where a neighbor cat who goes outside left a eviscerated mouse in front of our door one morning. So our poor housemate opened the door and saw this dead mouse just sitting there, and kind of thing happens often. So asking owners to keep track of these kinds of prey returns can also be an effective way of measuring. But of course, because you're asking people to measure them, they're not always reliable data. And based on some camera data that I've mentioned before, they've seen that only about 30% of prey captures are actually returned to the home. So with the camera, they're actually able to see, okay, this is how many attempts they made at catching this prey. This is how many times they were successful at killing the prey. And of those times, this is how many times they actually brought back the prey. And so when they totaled all of that, they only found about 30% that were brought back to the home. So using this as a method is a gross underestimation of how much they're actually hunting, but can still be useful. And I just wanted to take this to show this to you, which was a Nextdoor post that I came across a few years ago about somebody who found a dead bird in their backyard. And then it started this debate and conversation between all these different people in the neighborhood who were talking about how cats should be indoors or cats should not be indoors. And some people were arguing that this should be an ordinance, and some people were arguing that it's natural for cats to hunt. There's a lot of debate. And as you know, it's a kind of a heated and polarizing topic to bring up at a dinner table. So this brings me to the next portion of my talk, which is how do we incorporate people into this kind of research? Because it naturally involves people. It involves cat owners who are making decisions about their cats. It involves people who are dedicating their time into different organizations like this organization that are meant to kind of bring people together on a common cause of some kind. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. So people choose to let their cats outside or choose to keep their cats in for various reasons. And to highlight some of those reasons, on one hand, cats can, as we saw, have an immense effect on wildlife. But not only that, um, when they go outside, there are legitimate safety concerns associated with outdoor access for cats themselves. So they are not immune to automobile accidents or various kinds of fights with other animals or attacks from predators like coyotes, for example. So in fact, cats that are outdoors have a lifespan of about half of an indoor cat. So it is actually a concern that affects cats for themselves as well. And of course, there's also a risk of disease transmission. So hopefully all cats that are allowed outside are being vaccinated, but that might not always be the case. And they might still get into fights that could lead to disease transmission or other things like that that could be detrimental for their health. But on the flip side, there are legitimate benefits for the cat to go outside, such as being provided some kind of mental stimulation and environmental enrichment, which is a fear a lot of owners have about keeping their cats indoors. And that is part of the hesitancy that people have about keeping their cats indoors is that, oh, I'm away from my house all day at work, and then I come home and my cat has just been alone all day without anyone to interact with, any stimulation. And it is true that if they go outside, that there is more stimulation enrichment that is available outside. Also, physical activity is a huge benefit of outdoor access, where obesity is one of the biggest challenges of indoor cats that a lot of cats experience. And vets really don't like it when your cat gains weight because it leads to a bunch of other issues. But if you allow your cats outside, then there's natural increase in physical activity that can be beneficial for their health. And lastly, outdoor access can actually allow for expressions of natural behaviors, not only hunting, but also scratching and urinating, marking, things like that, that people might not actually want to promote indoors. So I've heard also many owners saying, I actually don't want to keep litter boxes. I think they smell bad and they're gross. Or, I don't want my cat to destroy furniture. Even though those are very natural behaviors that the cat needs to exhibit, people are often hesitant to promote those behaviors indoors for other reasons. So given these kind of overall pros and cons, I guess, of each choice, I was really interested in kind of diving deeper into the motivations of people. And so in one of my projects was focused on understanding owner motivations. Why do they want to keep their cats indoors? Why do they want to let their cats outside? So here I've listed on the left all the kinds of reasons that were listed as potential reasons to keep a cat indoors. So these are all owners that currently choose to keep their cats indoors. And the colors will show how strongly they agree or disagree with each of those reasons. And you can find that the majority of owners agreed that they keep their cats indoors for various reasons about their safety, such as avoiding injuries and accidents or harmful encounters with other animals, avoid being lost or stolen, preventing disease transmission, but also things like following expert recommendations like vets and behavioral specialists. And there's also for the purpose of preventing their hunting of wild animals. Then I asked owners who currently let their cats outside how strongly they agree these are the reasons why they let their cats outside. So on the left, you will see all the potential reasons listed. And same thing, the colors will show how strongly they agree or disagree. And the majority of owners in my study found or reported that they were keeping their cats or letting their cats outside because they wanted to provide a natural environment or reduce boredom. So similar, that kind of environmental enrichment and stimulation type of thing that I mentioned before. Also promoting physical activity to promote natural behaviors. And the remaining reasons were not as much of a reason why they were letting their cats outside.
Question.
Yeah.
All done locally,
Yes, this was all locally in this area. So this was Davis, Sacramento, and surrounding cities. Yeah, within an hour of UC Davis. Then I asked the same owners, given these hypothetical scenarios, are you likely to reduce outdoor access? So here are the hypothetical scenarios that I listed. So those include some about the safety of the cat being compromised and some about knowing if their cat was negatively impacting wildlife, like hunting birds. And people reported, interestingly, the majority or more than half, so almost 60% of people reported that they were likely or somewhat likely to reduce outdoor access if their cat's safety was compromised, like if they were living near busier streets, if they were living near busier or more dangerous animals, if they knew their cat wasn't coming home consistently. And lastly, and I thought really interestingly, over 50% of owners said that if they knew their cat was negatively impacting local wildlife, that they would be likely or somewhat likely to reduce outdoor access, which wasn't something that I expected. And then I asked a bunch of questions. There's a lot on here, but I wanted to mainly bring your attention to this bottom, which was how strongly do you agree or disagree with this statement that you're responsible for your cat's effect on wildlife? And surprisingly, regardless of how much outdoor access the cat was being provided, the majority of owners said either strongly or somewhat agreed that they were responsible for their cat's impact on wildlife. So to me, this data suggested that it's not that the owners are believing that their cat wasn't that cat's negative impact on wildlife wasn't bad, but that they just did not feel that their cat particularly was negatively impacting wildlife. So it's more of an understanding of what their cat was doing compared to what other cats were doing. So that brings me to the last part of my talk on now that we know a lot about cats and wildlife, where do we go from here? What do we want to study next? And I think this is a topic and kind of a rhetoric that I think is really helpful to when it comes to educating people, where actually this is a project that's done in Ontario called Keep Cats Safe and Save Bird Lives. So this kind of hinges on this idea that actually promoting wildlife welfare also promotes cat welfare because of the reasons that I suggested. like the cats having less or a shorter lifespan when they go outside, and or all sorts of other dangers that lie outside that may actually not be beneficial for them anyway. So there's growing interest in this type of rhetoric as well, in terms of kind of thinking of wildlife and cats in the same breath. And there's also been some more empirical research showing that introducing certain things can actually decrease predation or predatory behaviors of cats. So in this study, they had 6 different treatment groups. F was control, but they tested all these different methods that they knew were supposedly going to reduce predation or predatory behaviors in cats. So A is a bell on their collar, which is something that a lot of people suggest people to do. B was increasing animal-based protein content in their food. C was a puzzle feeder, so that was meant to kind of mimic enrichment of some kind and working for their food and getting that part of hunting in. And then D is what is called a birds be safe collar cover. And that is like a clown collar looking thing, which is super colorful and meant to deter birds and to kind of warn birds that there's a predator coming. So before the cat is able to get to the bird, it's supposed to warn them so that they can fly away. And then E was interactive object play, where the owner played with their cat for at least 5 minutes a day using some kind of toy, object toy. And then F was just control. And they found that, they found that increasing animal-based protein in their diet, as well as introducing interactive play, significantly reduced the number of predation events that their cat was showing. So this suggested that maybe there are some things that the cat isn't getting that is contributing to this hunting behavior, which may not be explaining all of the hunting events, but could potentially help the cat as well as wildlife. So some final takeaways. Throughout my dissertation, I have found that owner education is one of the most key ways that we can actually implement conservation strategies, and not only on just the effect of cats on wildlife, but also this idea that promoting wildlife welfare actually also can promote cat welfare and often does. And secondly, kind of promoting this idea of implementing exclusionary buffer zones to protect specific vulnerable areas, like I said about forest edges and other areas with a lot of native species that we need to protect. Implementing these kinds of exclusionary zones might be a really good way to prevent cats from being able to enter that area. And there's a lot of research being done currently on how do we keep cats out, actually. And then also that individuals really matter. That when we often think about these data sets on the effect of cats on wildlife, we're only looking at the overall population, but not individuals. So it's possible that if you had a study of 50 cats and you recorded 100 predation events, that all 100 of them are coming from 2 cats or something like that. So in reality, I think we should be prioritizing identifying those high-risk individual cats instead of overall saying all cats should be banned, all cats should be, instead of coming up with those solutions that are a little bit more controversial and difficult to get people on board. We should prioritize figuring out a way to identify these high-risk individuals that are more likely to contribute to those wildlife deaths and target conservation strategies to those individuals. And of course, more research is always needed. So hopefully this was a little bit of a window into this topic of cats and wildlife. And there's many different ways I leash walk my cat, for example, that people can, I think, introduce ways that they can still promote environmental enrichment and stimulation for cats while still protecting wildlife. And I hope that these kinds of nuances can bring people together in understanding this really complex problem better and coming up with sustainable solutions for this conservation issue. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge Viola Bertelines for hosting this talk for me, and then our labs and all these sources of funding who funded my research, and my 2 cats who were always the subjects zero for any kind of research that I did. Thank you. Yeah.
So I used to volunteer at an animal shelter that was very like pro-neuter, pro keeping their cats indoors. And so I've also gotten into debates with people because of that. I think in one of your previous slides, you talked about the survey with people from Sacramento, Davis, if you need more of this or that.
Mhm.
I think one of them, it's mentioned experts.
Yeah.
So my question for that is, first, what are you considering to be experts? Are you talking about vets? Are you talking about, wildlife individuals? Are you talking about like all experts? There was something else I was gonna say, but yeah.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so when we sent out the survey in this question,
Excuse me,
we
Hee Jin.
listed potential experts and we listed vets, behavior professionals. I think we listed researchers as well. But yeah, that's what we listed as experts. And I guess it was still somewhat up to them to determine what experts they were referring to. But yeah, that was still interesting because I think people have different relationships with different groups of those experts. So yeah.
Hi, excuse me, this is Ken.
Following expert recommendation was on the outdoor. So in your experience, do more experts say your cat yours?
Great question. Yeah.
Question.
Yes, yes, yes. So the first question was, what did we mean when we say expert recommendations? Like, which experts are we talking about? And then the second follow-up question was, I did not have that as an option for the outdoor cats. So, in my experience, have I found that experts are more likely to support outdoor access or keeping cats indoors? And I think that really varies. The reason I didn't include it in the outdoor cat section was it was more intuitive for us to think about a health professional like a vet promoting keeping cats indoors for health reasons. But then there's also many vets that say actually getting indoor cats are more obese and they're not getting enough physical activity. So I think there's kind of nuances there. But when we designed this study, we were intending on focusing on the like physical, I guess, dangers that come from outdoor access. And I think when I work with vets and shelters, they often see a lot of injuries cases from cats that go outside, and that's much more common in obviously outdoor cats than indoor cats to have these wounds or injuries that need to be treated right away. So I think there's like a general feeling of experts recommending that cats should be supervised at least when they're outside from the cat welfare perspective.
Yeah, I don't think
Ex ex Excuse me, can you hear me?
my cat be shit.
Mhm.
Or I think people also, I'm not a cat owner, but I think I've also seen like screens.
Yes, catios. Yeah.
You see research on those and what those do.
Yeah, those are much less studied. And that is something that I think more people should study is comparing those kinds of controlled outdoor access methods and uncontrolled outdoor access. I found that a lot of cats, at least in my research, that go outside are actually either supervised or controlled in some way. So they will say, "Oh, my cat goes into the backyard, but doesn't leave the backyard." There's so many, I think part of the reason it's so difficult is there's so many degrees of that. So often I got responses that said, "Oh, my cat is a supervised cat. My cat goes outside into the backyard and doesn't leave." And then I think, are you watching the cat the whole time to make sure the cat doesn't leave the backyard? Because often the cat can clear a fence really easily and then leave and come back. So that it was really difficult for me to figure out how to categorize that into the degrees of outdoor access. But yeah, definitely more research needs to be done on the supervised or controlled outdoor access. But that I think for now is the general recommendation in terms of providing outdoor access is to make sure you're there to supervise what's happening. Yeah.
Ken was gonna say something soon.
Yeah.
So
Excuse me, can you hear me? This is Ken.
maybe you can't hear me, you could invite him to say something.
Yeah. Ken, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I don't have a question. Well, I do have two questions. I do have some questions from the Zoom, but I'd like to ask that for questions that are in the room, would you please
Oh,
repeat
is there
the
something in the
questions?
chat maybe?
Will you please repeat the
Just
questions
on
for the
highlight.
people on Zoom?
Okay.
So there is a question. The first
There's
question, you got it?
There's also a question. Would you please repeat the two
Got it.
practices that
Mhm.
significantly reduced? Oh yeah. So it was introducing playtime with the cat for at least 5 minutes a day in using an object toy. And then yes, high protein, animal-based protein diet. The diet portion, I think, has been kind of questioned by a lot of people because they didn't have a different study group where they introduced a new diet that wasn't higher in protein. So people think, oh, introducing a novel food in itself might have caused changes in the cat's behavior. So take that with a grain of salt. Um, and Ken, did you want to put your question in the chat or?
No, I don't have a question. What I'm doing is trying to point out there are questions in the chat.
Oh, yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Hmm.
Sorry, I just had the sound off, so I couldn't hear you. Okay, I think there was maybe, yeah.
Dogs or kids?
The question is, which are smarter, dogs or cats? Well, I think that they're smart in their own ways, for sure. I have seen videos lately of border collies being trained to like scent dog training. I saw a video recently where a person just put just like a pen marker on their hand. They drew something on their hand with a pen, and then they let the dog sniff it, and then they threw the pen into like a river. And then the dog takes less than 2 minutes to go find it. And the dog didn't see where it went. The dog was somewhere else. And then so the person throws the pen and then they call the dog over and then they let the dog smell their hand and then the dog is off. And in 2 minutes the dog finds the pen. I don't think a cat could do something like that. But cats are really smart in terms of, yeah, cats are really, really smart in terms of being really cued into prey, for example, prey movements and things like that. They're really hyper fixated on those kinds of things and are very good about knowing when they should jump out to ambush something and when they should kind of stay put. And I actually do a lot of training with my cats, which I think a lot of people don't realize you can do. So that's something else that I think we recommend to do to provide more enrichment in the home. So my cat knows how to like sit and give his paw, and if I do like this, he'll go through my hands and that kind of stuff. So people can teach cats to do all sorts of things. So I recommend that. Yeah.
Very smart, but it's not how to play the piano. Play the paws and the little kids piano.
That's incredible. Cats are pretty smart. Yeah, definitely.
There
Yeah.
is another question on Zoom.
Oh, let me get to the in-person question. Yeah.
So the recommendations we're having cats killing wild. Maybe talk about them a little more. I want to say that my initial sense of them, the one was having somebody study the cats enough to identify the few who are the killer.
Right.
That strikes me as impractical in most places. Someone's got to be dedicated.
Definitely.
Imagine the city they was assigned to. The recommendations right before that had to do with identifying areas where you want to.
Yeah.
Cats have those places.
Yeah.
Again, how do you keep cats
Right.
I don't have to keep cat out of my front yard.
Yeah.
What do you imagine doing that makes that work?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we actually implement these kinds of recommendations to reduce cats' effect on wildlife? So, for example, if the priority is to try to identify these high-risk individuals and figure out which ones are the ones that are killing, how do we do that? Is that not too unrealistic? And then if there are some areas that should be blocked off from cats, how do we actually keep cats out? That's a really great question. I think when it comes to identifying individuals, I've thought about doing this throughout my dissertation, but just did not have the time. But I think definitely more research needs to be done to look at what other behavioral traits of a cat can we use as cues to predict how well they will do as predators. So there must be some kind of other behavioral or maybe even physiological traits or even a genetic basis that could potentially explain how much they're likely to be hunters. And so if we're able to kind of narrow those things down, maybe instead of kind of hiring someone to go out there and observe all the cats, maybe there's a way that you can, for example, like take a survey about your cat, and then it will tell you based on your answers about your cat's behavior and where you're living and things like that, maybe it'll give you a score of how likely it is that your cat will be impactful for the environment. So that's kind of my dream, I think, for this field is to be able to implement something like that, which I don't think will happen anytime soon, but that's a possibility. And in terms of keeping cats out of certain areas, there are some people in New Zealand that are currently studying effects of kind of having dog bark sounds play, having speakers in these vulnerable areas. Yeah, it sounds really silly, but yeah, they've been putting out speakers to see different cats' responses to these kinds of animal calls and also the wildlife responses to these calls to see if there's something that we can figure out, some call that we can play that will keep cats out but not affect the wildlife behavior. So they're actively studying something like that as well.
Well, that's good. I would point out that in some of the vineyards in Yolo County, people play alarm calls and birds and hawk calls.
Mm-hmm.
And no effect.
Mm,
They're playing hour after hour.
exactly. Exactly. Right. Right. That's another problem with cats being smart is that they will quickly learn this actually isn't a real danger. It's just a random sound. But I think that's why this idea of kind of animal welfare and ecology are actually really tightly knit because when you think about, for example, oh, why is my cat so afraid of the sound of my vacuum? I vacuum my house once a week and still yet like after each time he's still afraid of the sound of the vacuum and runs upstairs or sound of a knock, for example. My one cat is terribly afraid of the sound of the knock. There's no actual danger associated with a knock. He just runs upstairs when he hears a knock day in and day out. So I think those kinds of things can be used to inform how we use these management strategies and research that kind of stuff too. And then I think there was a Zoom question. Okay. What about any progress for legislating rules for keeping cats within yards and on leashes like dogs? Good question. As far as I know, we're pretty far from something like that. I think in New Zealand, they have officially added domestic cats as one of the predators for their predator-free 2050 project, which is their projects to keep and eliminate all non-native predators from the island by 2050. So they used to not have cats on there because there was so much backlash from people. And New Zealand is actually such an interesting case in my mind because actually the majority of cat owners in New Zealand let their cats outside and just to freely roam. And that they think that is a natural thing, that is a normal thing for cats. We should keep doing that. And yet they also have this huge problem of vulnerable wildlife that they're trying to protect. So I've always thought that was such a cognitive dissonance of, well, you are supporting feral cats from getting cold, but also you're saying my cat should be allowed outside. how are you able to kind of have that separation in your mind? But I think people certainly, yeah, I think there's some cultural shift, but I think people are still like we did a study in New Zealand, actually on using something like this in New Zealand, and we got 1,800 responses from cat owners and non-cat owners. And the majority of people were letting their cats outside and thought it was a natural thing and it was important for the cat's well-being. And we actually got a lot of angry emails from people saying, it's clear from this study that you want to keep cats indoors or you want to promote cats being indoors. This is not in line with animal welfare beliefs that I have and all of these things. And we got a lot of emails like that, very angry emails. So it was clear to me that the general public's perception was that that was a bad thing to try to keep your cat indoors. So that's another interesting side note. But there are countries that are doing something like that. Yeah.
Is there an attempt to educate early, like teach them in the elementary schools that kids could take home to their parents about, we want to save our birds, we want to save our.
That's a really good question, and I don't know if people have tried that. I know there are countries where they have kind of these derbies where it's kind of morbid, but they train or they bring kids um, to these sites where they kind of set out these traps to kill cats, and they participate in that as kids, which I think people have very, obviously, I don't know if I fully support. No, I definitely don't think that's a good idea. But people have kind of taken, yeah, people have taken the like early education to that direction too in other countries. But yeah, I think that is a great idea to try to educate early and educate young children about the impact of cats on wildlife, especially for those who have cats themselves and they can learn more about their own companion animals and also about the world around them. Yeah, certainly. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And yeah.
Are there any barriers, cat barriers that you found in your studies
Barriers in what way?
for access? Were there any barriers besides the sounds
Oh,
for
uh-huh.
restricting cat access?
Um, I think this is really interesting because when I think of barriers to stop a cat from behaving something, I often think about how do I keep my cat off the counter or how do I keep my cat from scratching this part of the furniture? And I think the problem is that cats generally, people who have studied cat cognition have found that they respond really poorly to negative reinforcement. So if they're punished for doing something wrong, so using like a water, what's it called, sprayer, which a lot of people do to kind of keep their cats off of something, that actually doesn't work very well long term because that only detriments the relationship between the person who's implementing the reinforcement and the cat, and it can lead to other things. But generally, so experts recommend positive reinforcement when the behavior isn't done. So it's possible, like that study that was looking at different areas and how forest edges were more vulnerable, if we concentrate feeding stations to far away from those areas. And actually, they found that non-native rodents were like rats were more likely to be hunted far away from those forest edges. So if we concentrate those feeding stations that are attracting cats away from those vulnerable habitats, then that might be one way we can keep them out instead of having something at that barrier itself. So that's another thing that I can think of. Any other questions? Yeah.
I think it's probably the bottom right, but I'm wondering where the dissertation was published. Is it that?
Yeah, this was one of the chapters that was published, and in the same journal, we published the research that was inspired by this study that we did in New Zealand. So you can read about that as well. That was published last year. So that is also in that journal. Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, Applied Animal Behavior Science is the journal. Yeah. Or you can also Google my name, and on my Google Scholar, there should be those two papers. Yeah.
Why you thought that there were so many cats outdoors in Davis versus Philadelphia, where you said there were none?
Yes.
Why?
Yeah, I think that has something to do with that kind of goes more into here where we found that people were more likely to say, yeah, if I lived near busier streets, I would consider keeping my cats indoors. And I think that was really it. Where I lived in Philadelphia, there was very little green space. Even if a cat were to go outside, the only thing they would see is, trash cans and cars. So there's not as much incentive for the owner to let their cats out when there's more dangers like cars and there's less benefits in their opinion. Like there's no nature for them to interact with, so it's not really enrichment and they're just being endangered. So I think for them, for people in those hyper urban areas, they're less likely to let their cats out for those reasons. Yeah. That's why I think when we try to identify these high risk individual cats, I think that should be a big factor as well. If you live near an area, a really protected area, that should increase your cat's risk level. Even if your cat itself isn't a big hunter, maybe you should reconsider letting your cats outside. So that's another layer to that. Did somebody else? Yeah.
You've done a population patterns here in Davis, how many cats are there here in Davis?
I have not done.
This goes down. Seems like this has been a year there are more cats than I've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's a lot of outdoor cats here. The question was, have I done any population density studies in this area? And I have not done any official population density studies, but that is one of the projects that I was encouraging some of my undergraduate students to do, where they would essentially walk in a transect all around the town and city of Davis, and then count, note every time they saw a cat and what they were doing, etc. So I think that is a potentially really,
And cat.
yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, or something else that I really wanted to do is also develop like a cat app of some kind where you can very easily take a photo of the cat, and this would be more effective in a regional scale. You would just walk around. If you saw a cat on your walk, take a picture. And then if your cat is lost, for example, maybe you can go on an app like that, and then you will see all the sightings of the cats in your area. And maybe that'll inform where you look to try to find your lost cat. So it can benefit a lot of people, but it would certainly be such a cool project. So that was one of the things that I was really wanting to do, just not have the time. Yes.
Think about strand supplemental feeding cats, like put something out at night, that will then say they won't prey on something, then do you think that's just a dream?
Well, actually, according to some of the research I've shown you today, at least, having food out actually encourages cats to come more, and also was correlated, at least in Washington, D.C., was correlated with more predation events. So I actually think that leaving food out for cats isn't reducing their hunting much, because the cats that are probably walking around eating food are probably also coming from places where they already have access to food. So there's a delicate balance that I think, and I think that's why feeding stations, I think, are a really good place to focus research attempts at. So you can have cameras at feeding stations and see which cats come and are they ever hunting near these feeding areas and all of those things. So there's a lot of potential there.
Excuse me, this is Ken. What
Yes.
was that? What was that last question?
The last question was feeding stations. So if we were to leave food out for cats more, do you think that is actually an effective strategy at trying to reduce cat hunting? So because often people think, oh, if a cat isn't hungry, it won't hunt. So that was
Okay.
then, yeah.
Okay, then there's another question from Zoom.
Was there any questions about people caring about their cat's scat and digging, etc., in neighbors' yards? Great question. I have a neighbor cat who comes into our yard and urinates all over our yard, and often also will get into staring contests with my cats that are indoors. And my cats actually have had urinary tract infections because of the stress from outdoor cats that were kind of harassing them through the window, which is terrible. So I have a personal reason for not wanting neighbor cats in our yard. But I didn't have any questions about people and finding scats in their neighbors' yards. Actually, that would be a really interesting thing to look at because I know a lot of people find cat scats in their yards, and it's a huge problem. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's high in nitrates. Yeah, because they're hypercarnivores. So. Yeah, so often, yeah, it's also not super great for the environment either. So I think, yeah, I think that would actually, when I was doing the scat work, I thought about just sending out a message to Davis residents and saying, can I just come to your backyard and collect a bunch of cat scats? I'll clean your yard for you. So I think that might be a great way to kind of collect a lot of cat scats if you're interested in looking at what's in them. It's not too late. I could be there tomorrow. Somebody said it's the digging up of garden beds and vegetables for us and friends. Yes, I have had this issue as well. It's not just wildlife, but cats that come to your yard and dig up vegetables, and it is a problem. Did somebody else have a question? Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.